Uh-oh, there might be trouble in paradise, folks. Moderate Democrats are now opposing the massive $360 billion component of the $1.9 trillion American Rescue Plan that goes towards aid for state and local governments. This poses unforeseen and new challenges for the Biden administration as they try and get the massive $1.9 trillion American Rescue Plan pushed through the House, through the Senate, to the President's desk for signature before the March 14 deadline. You'll see this article published in the Washington Post. Moderate Senate Democrats target state aid fund in the Biden stimulus plan. So there is a lot of controversy now starting to brew. You've already seen comments from the Senate Minority Leader, Mitch McConnell. You've seen the very forceful stance from the Senate Majority Leader, Chuck Schumer. But now what's happening is not only is there a dispute about the federal minimum wage, which, by the way, is being opposed by the conservative Democrat Joe Manchin as well as the Democrat from Arizona, Kristen Sinema. But now new individuals who typically side with the Democrats have come out against the need for the $360 billion in state and local aid. And why are they concerned? Well, here's why. Some Democratic and independent lawmakers who typically vote Democrat, like Angus King, have actually said that they are concerned that as soon as the aid is going to be released and made available to local mayors and governors, those local mayors and governors will turn around and slash taxes in their states. So they're saying, hey, wait a minute, we're not going to send you money so you can slash taxes and become essentially more financially irresponsible. And what these lawmakers want is for individuals, meaning states, governors, to take this money and then use it to help the state recover from the pandemic, as opposed to saying, hey, we now have a slush fund, let's just slash taxes because we don't have the money. They want the money to be used appropriately. Here's a comment from Angus King, who's an independent from Maine. Angus King said this in a Washington Post article, and I'll provide you to the link in the Washington Post article in the description section below, so make sure you check it out. He said we could distribute billions to the states and they turn around and lower taxes. There are governors that are actually talking about that, and that's not the point here. There should be a prohibition against voluntarily diminishing revenues. In fact, Angus King suggested that a full $50 billion out of the $360 billion allocation for state and local aid out of the $1.9 trillion used for broadband services, used to extend the availability of internet across the country. Now, Mark Warner, who's a Democrat from Virginia, did suggest the same thing, as did, get this, the Federal Reserve Chairman Jerome Powell. Here's a quote from Jerome Powell. He said, I hope the current package can be changed to include a sizable investment in broadband, because it's really simple. If broadband is more widely available in the United States, it allows more connectivity, it allows more productivity, it allows kids to get educated faster, it overall allows an improvement in the local economy and the lives of citizens. Now, Mark Zandi, who's an economist at Moody's Analytics, who typically is in favor of almost everything that the Democrats do, he actually released a report showing that the state and the local downfall as a direct result of the pandemic amounted to approximately $60 billion through the entire fiscal year 2022. In other words, he said states are going to need $60 billion to get through the crisis in 2020, 2021, and 2022. Now, folks, you know, and I know there's a big difference between $360 billion and $60 billion. What Mark Zandi is saying is you need $1, and what he's saying is President Biden's plan has $5 instead of $1 to help us get through this crisis. Now, when I say us, I'm talking about states all across the country. Now, here's something that's even more interesting. Zandi said that he sent this analysis to the White House, and keep in mind the White House, Jen Psaki, and all the officials at the White House, including the director of the White House Economic Council, Brian Deese, have consistently referred to Mark Zandi's reports whenever it essentially suits their narrative. But this report, they seem to be keeping rather quiet about it. I wonder why. Well, here's what Zandi said. He said, there's still a lot of uncertainty in these estimates, but $100 to $150 billion would be appropriate given the circumstances. That's well shy of the $350 billion they have penciled in the legislation. You have Mark Zandi, who's an economist that the Democrats quote all the time. You have Mark Zandi, an economist who sent his findings to the White House, who's now saying that, hey, this is way more money than what we need. Isn't that interesting? In fact, Zandi went one step further and said the money should be repurposed for infrastructure spending because it's a better way to restore full employment and long-term economic prospects for those who have been left behind. And he said, say they would go to $150 billion for state and local aid, that would give them $150 billion for infrastructure. So here's what Zandi is saying. The original proposal of the American Rescue Plan includes $350 billion. Okay, I've seen some statistics saying it was $360 billion. But folks, since we're talking about $1.9 trillion, what's $10 billion here and there? It's not important, is it? You know I'm being sarcastic. But let's say it's $350 billion for state and local aid. What Zandi is saying is split up that $350 billion or $300 billion into $150 billion for state and local aid, which according to him is plenty. Because remember, he said that the shortfall through 2022 was just $60 billion. Not 350, 360. So he said, hey, use $150 billion for state and local aid and take the remaining $150 billion and use it for infrastructure. Use it for things like broadband, which, by the way, is what the Federal Reserve Chairman Jerome Powell said. Use it for things like AI development. Use it for things like building our roads, building our bridges, shoring up our borders, which, by the way, is what Rick Scott, the senator from Florida, wants in the $1.9 trillion American Rescue Plan. But on the other hand, there are those who feel that this money is absolutely necessary. According to reporting by the Washington Post, Tom Cochran, who's the CEO and executive director of the U.S. Conference of Mayors, said that the reports that show that states are rebounding are just not telling the truth. In fact, they are hiding the fact that the actual economy at the ground level in the trenches is indeed very, very dire, and individuals essentially are struggling more than what the numbers let up. Here's what he said. He said there is no indication from the House side or the White House that is not totally supporting the fiscal support for state and local governments. But the Senate throughout the process has left state and local aid on the cutting room floor. Basically, he's saying, hey, the White House is on our side, but the Senate seems to be ignoring all our issues. And he said that's where the drama is going to be. He said, you have to have the Democrats stand with the president to withstand this pressure. We have to make sure these senators stand with the president. So you can see there's a clear focus for state and local aid from mayors. Now, you have heard me talk about this previously on my channel. Senators and congressmen and congresswomen are driven by political ideologies. So their ideologies are political. On the other hand, mayors and governors who have to take care of their constituents, who have to make sure that local services are maintained, who have to make sure that police, firefighters, school teachers, everything's working functionally at the ground level. They are more concerned with realistic, practical principles. Now, is there likely to be some waste from mayors and governors? 100% absolutely. There is always going to be waste in the world that we live in. But like I said, the politicians are driven by political, ideological considerations. The mayors and the governors are driven by practical, realistic considerations. So you can see that they want this state and local aid. And while all this is happening, I can tell you the Republicans are not happy at all. In fact, the Republicans feel cornered. They feel they're on defense because the Democrats hold the majority in the Senate. Keep in mind that we have 50 Democratic senators and we have 50 Republican senators, with the tie-breaking vote being cast by Vice President Kamala Harris. This means that the entire situation is in favor of the Democrats. In fact, Susan Collins, who's a Republican from Maine, said the administration has not indicated a willingness to come down from the $1.9 trillion figure. And that's a major obstacle. Unfortunately, the White House seems wedded to a figure that really cannot be justified. So what we're looking at now is whether there are changes that we would make. So you can see that there's really growing discontent amongst the Republicans about this. And the Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell, who called this a Democratic wish list, he said that Biden has an A-plus personality, but that Republicans are unified in opposition, his words, unified in opposition to what he called a partisan bill, a one-sided bill. And it's very clear that the Republicans are very much against this. Let me know what you think about the whole issue, the whole argument about state and local aid. I can do another video talking about which states pay more, which states pay less. But right now, we're looking at this becoming a big stumbling block in the approval of the $1.9 trillion stimulus package. Thank you so much for watching. I appreciate you. Please click the like button. Please subscribe. Please enable notifications. That would mean a lot to me personally. I would really appreciate that. That really helps out the YouTube algorithm. Thank you so much for watching. I'm looking forward to seeing you in the next episode of Ignition Time. Take care. Bye.